never imagined a man could make my life feel both like a battlefield and a sanctuary. Yet here was Damien Caro, the kind of man who smiled only in shadows and commanded respect like it was oxygen. And he had somehow become the gravity of my world. My first encounter with Damien was the kind of moment that sticks in your chest like a stone. He had a presence that demanded attention. Even when he was silent, people around him seemed to inhale with caution. I was just another intern in the sprawling corporate world of Manhattan, my heart still nursing the fragile scars of a recent heartbreak. I had been warned about Damien cold, ruthless, untouchable, but no warning could have prepared me for the way he made the air itself feel heavy. It started with small things. A sharp glance that lingered a second too long. A hand brushing mine by accident or perhaps not so accidentally, and a way of speaking that cut straight through my defenses. I told myself it was intimidation, that it was his method of control. Yet, behind the formal steel of his suit and the intimidating architecture of his office, there was something else. Something dangerously magnetic. I remember the first time I stayed late in the office, pretending to finish reports, when he appeared behind me without a sound. "You work too hard," he said, his voice low and deliberate, brushing over me like a whispered accusation. My stomach tumbled in a way that had nothing to do with spreadsheets. I didn't answer immediately, unsure if he was mocking me or genuinely concerned. His eyes held a strange glimmer, one that contradicted the stern lines of his face. "Or maybe you just like being watched," I retorted, half joking, half terrified. A shadow of amusement flickered across his face before he returned to his usual stone-cold mask. That fleeting smile was enough to send my heart racing for days. Damien Caro was a paradox. He was ice, and yet every time he looked at me, it felt like a fire had been ignited somewhere deep inside. Weeks passed. The tension between us became a game of subtle power and silent confessions. A lingering touch when handing over documents, shared coffee breaks where his gaze lingered just a second too long, the occasional brush of hands on the stairwell. I hated that I noticed it, hated that it thrilled me, hated that the air seemed to hum whenever he was near, and yet I couldn't pull away. I began to understand that beneath his icy veneer was a man drowning in his own restraint. Damien's life had been shaped by control of image, control of emotions, control of everything that could possibly betray weakness. But with me, he faltered. Not often and never publicly, but in the quiet corners of the office, or during late-night meetings where we were alone, he allowed fragments of himself to slip through. A sigh too soft to hear, a brief hesitation in speech, a glance that held too much intensity. Then came the night I broke. It had been a brutal day back-to-back meetings, impossible deadlines, and the kind of tension that leaves your shoulders knotted and your mind screaming. I had been running on pure adrenaline and anxiety when I spilled my coffee across an important report. The moment Damien walked in, I expected his usual sharp reprimand. Instead, he froze, almost shocked, and then he laughed. Not the polite, dismissive laugh of a superior who had seen it all before, but a full, rich laugh that shook his shoulders and made the room seem warmer than it had in weeks. I blinked, caught off guard. You're laughing at me?" I asked, trying to mask the heat rising to my cheeks. He shook his head slowly, still grinning, a rare softness in his eyes. "Not at you," he said. "With you." And then, as if the universe had shifted on its axis, the walls of professionalism crumbled. He came closer, crouching slightly to help me pick up the soaked papers. His hand brushed mine, and my pulse skyrocketed. The warmth of his skin against mine, the faint scent of his cologne, the intense look he gave me as if he could see every corner of my soul was overwhelming. I wanted to step back, wanted to remind myself that Damien Caro was untouchable. But the truth was undeniable. I was already falling hard. From that night on, everything changed. The office became a stage for our unspoken tension. A glance could send shivers down my spine. A fleeting touch could unravel my thoughts. Damien remained controlled, precise, and intimidating, but now, for the first time, he was also vulnerable, and that vulnerability drew me closer in ways I didn't understand. And then came the confrontation I had been secretly dreading. It was late, The kind of night when the city hums softly in the background, and only a few stubborn streetlights punctuate the darkness outside the glass walls of the office. Damien stood near the window, arms crossed, looking out at the city below, and I felt like a child caught in the eye of a storm. "You're impossible," I blurted, my frustration leaking through despite my attempts to maintain composure. "Do you know that?" He didn't turn immediately, letting the words hang between us. When he finally did, his eyes locked on mine, and there was something raw in that gaze, something that stripped away my defenses. "I know," he said quietly. "And yet, I can't stay away from you either." The confession hit me like a tidal wave. I had seen glimpses of his feelings, hints and shadows that teased and tormented me, but hearing it out loud, made my knees weak. I wanted to run, to deny it, to shield myself from the danger of getting close to someone like him. But I couldn't. We stood there, suspended in the tension of our unspoken desires. My hand itched to reach out to him, to close the distance that had been both a torment and a thrill. Finally, unable to resist, I stepped closer, and our hands met tentatively at first, then with a boldness that mirrored the emotions surging between us. Damien's touch was both electrifying and comforting. His fingers intertwined with mine as if he feared losing me, and in that instant, the cold, rigid walls he had built around his heart seemed to crack. I saw the man behind the manager, the man who was scared of vulnerability, yet craving it in the same breath. For a long time, we just stood there, hands linked, staring out at the city lights that mirrored the sparks igniting between us. It was intoxicating, terrifying, and overwhelmingly beautiful. I realized then that falling for Damien Caro was never going to be simple. He was a storm wrapped in ice, a paradox of desire and restraint, and yet he was also mine, in a way that was exhilarating and dangerous. And I would follow him, willingly, into the depths of whatever abyss awaited, because I knew that the love we shared hidden, forbidden, yet undeniable was worth every risk. The days that followed were a delicate dance of glances and half-smiles. Damien and I existed in a liminal space, neither fully acknowledged nor entirely denied. Each meeting, each touch was a gamble. One wrong move and the walls of professionalism could shatter, sending both of us tumbling into consequences we weren't ready to face. I tried to maintain my composure, to act like the confident intern who belonged in this high-rise world of glass and steel. But Damien had a way of unraveling me without a word. A mere shift in his stance, a flash of those dark, piercing eyes, and I was undone. It was maddening. One Friday evening, the office was nearly empty. The hum of the air conditioning and the soft click of my heels against the polished floor were the only sounds. I was organizing reports when I noticed him standing by the window, his silhouette stark against the fading sunset. "You're late," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, though my heart thudded erratically. "I waited," he replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. "I like watching you work." I felt my cheeks flush. There it was again, that subtle shift from his usual cold professionalism to something undeniably personal. I wanted to tease, to push him away and pretend none of this mattered, but the truth was far more dangerous. I wanted him to, in ways that were reckless and consuming. He stepped closer, and I could feel the warmth radiating from him, the faint scent of cedar and musk that had become intoxicating. "Do you ever stop to think?" he asked softly, his hand brushing against the edge of my desk. "About us? About what this could mean?" I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around a stack of papers. "Every day," I admitted, almost whispering, though the words carried the weight of confession. His gaze softened, and for a moment, he allowed himself to be vulnerable. "I'm afraid," he said, the admission raw and unexpected. "Afraid of losing control. Afraid of letting anyone in, because once I do." His voice trailed off, leaving a charged silence between us. I wanted to reach out, to tell him that I didn't care about the risks, that I was willing to dive into the abyss with him. But fear clenched my throat too tightly. Instead, I whispered, "Then let me in. Let me share that fear with you. For a heartbeat, the world outside ceased to exist. Damien closed the distance, his hands resting gently on my shoulders. Our faces were inches apart, and I could see the conflict raging behind his eyes, the pull between control and desire, between caution and surrender. "You're impossible," he murmured, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "And yet, I can't stay away." That night marked a turning point. What had been a slow burn of tension became a quiet storm. We found ourselves alone more often, whether by coincidence or intent. Meetings stretched into late hours, and we discovered corners of the office where we could be alone without interruption. Every touch, every stolen glance, every brush of hands was a silent declaration of what we both desperately wanted but feared to name. Yet, with intimacy came the inevitable friction. Damien's guarded nature clashed with my impulsive heart. There were moments when he would pull back, walls rising with a sudden, almost violent force. I would be left reeling, trying to decipher the coldness in his eyes. Was it anger, fear, or the cruel mask he wore to protect both of us from getting hurt? One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I found myself in the small office lounge, nursing a cup of coffee and trying to calm my racing thoughts. Damien entered, and the air seemed to thicken immediately. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice sharp but not unkind. I followed him silently to a quiet hallway, my pulse a relentless drum. He stopped, turning to face me, and the sight of him vulnerable yet commanding made my breath catch. "I can't promise that this won't hurt," he confessed, his hands tucked into his pockets, the tension in his shoulders betraying his inner turmoil. "I've never done this before. I've never let anyone get this close. And His voice faltered, but the sincerity in his eyes was undeniable. I stepped closer, daring to bridge the gap he had created. "Then let me learn with you," I whispered. "Let me be the one to stay when it hurts, to hold on when you can't." His lips parted, as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, he reached out, fingers brushing mine in a tentative, almost sacred gesture. That touch spoke volumes. It was an apology, a confession, a promise all in one. The weeks that followed were a delicate balance of desire and restraint. We navigated our unspoken love in the spaces between meetings, in the quiet moments after hours, and in the subtle shifts of the office hierarchy that allowed us fleeting glimpses of each other. Every interaction was charged, every glance loaded with unspoken meaning. But reality has a way of intruding on even the most fragile of paradises. Rumors began to circulate, small whispers about the closeness between the manager and the intern. I felt the sting of gossip like needles, but Damien remained steadfast, his icy exterior returning with a vengeance whenever anyone pried too close. One particularly brutal Monday, I was called into Damien's office. My heart sank, expecting a reprimand, or worse, a dismissal. But when I entered, I found him seated behind his desk, staring out the window with an intensity that made the room feel smaller, tighter. "Sit," he commanded softly. I obeyed, perching on the edge of the leather chair, unsure of what was to come. "I need to protect you," he said without preamble. "This, whatever this is dangerous. People don't understand, and they will use it against us if we're careless." I wanted to argue, to tell him that love was worth any risk, but his eyes, dark and commanding, silenced me. Instead, I nodded, understanding the depth of his fear and the weight of his care. "I won't let anyone hurt you," he continued, his hand reaching across the desk, brushing mine in a gesture both tender and possessive. "But you have to trust me. Trust me to lead, even when it's hard." The vulnerability in his voice struck me. Damien Caro, the untouchable, the cold, the commanding, was entrusting me with his heart and demanding mine in return. My chest tightened, and I realized in that moment that love, in its purest form, required not just passion, but courage. We began to carve out moments of joy amidst the tension. Quiet dinners, stolen walks through the city streets, and late-night conversations that stretched until the first light of dawn. Each experience deepened our connection, revealing layers of personality and desire that neither of us had dared to expose before. Damien's coldness softened in the intimacy of these private moments. He laughed more freely, touched more openly, and allowed himself to dream in ways I had never imagined. And I, in turn, learned to navigate the delicate balance of giving love without overwhelming him, of staying present without suffocating. Yet, the abyss lingered at the edges of our happiness. There were nights when fear clawed at his heart, and he withdrew into the familiar armor of control. During those times, I felt the weight of helplessness, knowing that the man I loved was trapped by his own insecurities. One rainy evening, we found ourselves alone in the office again. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil in our hearts, lightning illuminating the skyline, thunder rumbling like distant echoes of our fears. Damien stood by the window, water dripping from his coat, eyes fixed on the city below. I can't lose myself in this," he murmured, almost to himself. "I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to ruin us." I stepped closer, my hand reaching to rest on his arm. "You won't," I said firmly. "We'll navigate it together. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, he turned fully to face me, rain-soaked hair clinging to his forehead, eyes dark with emotion. He reached out, pulling me into a hug that was fierce and protective, a silent promise that no matter the abyss, we would face it together. In that embrace, I felt the culmination of weeks of tension, fear, and desire. Our hearts beat in unison, a quiet rebellion against the world outside. Damien Caro, the cold, untouchable manager, was no longer untouchable to me. And I, who had feared vulnerability, was finally learning the beauty of surrendering to love. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to our lives, one shaped by subtle declarations and shared moments. Damien's walls continued to hold firm in public, but behind closed doors, he allowed himself to be entirely present with me. Every brush of fingers, every quiet conversation, and every lingering gaze became a thread weaving us closer together. One crisp autumn evening, we found ourselves on the rooftop of the office building. The city spread out beneath us like a sparkling ocean of light. The wind teased at our clothes, carrying with it the scent of rain from earlier showers and the faint aroma of urban life. Damien stood a few steps away, his coat flaring in the breeze, and for a moment, he looked like a statue carved from obsidian and longing. "I never thought I'd feel like this," he admitted quietly, his eyes scanning the horizon before settling on me. Afraid, exhilarated, alive. I stepped closer, letting the wind tussle my hair as I reached for his hand. "Neither did I said softly. "But it feels right, doesn't it? Despite everything." He looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing every fear, every hope, every corner of my soul. His hand closed around mine, firm and warm. "Yes," he breathed. "Right. Completely. Right." The world around us seemed to pause. For the first time, there were no reports, no gossip, no walls between us, just the two of us, standing on the edge of the city, hearts aligned. I could feel the tension that had haunted us for weeks dissolve, replaced by a profound, quiet joy. We laughed together, a soft, shared sound that mingled with the city's distant hum. Damien's usual poise gave way to something playful, something tender. He leaned close, his forehead resting against mine, and whispered, "You've changed me, in ways I didn't think were possible." "I think we've changed each other," I replied, voice barely above the wind, yet carrying the weight of every unspoken word between us. Then, almost naturally, our lips met. It wasn't dramatic or rushed, no fiery declarations or desperate urgency, just a gentle, deliberate kiss that confirmed everything we had silently acknowledged. In that moment, I understood the depth of what we shared. A love forged in tension and trial, in fear and desire, and ultimately, in trust. As weeks turned into months, our relationship continued to blossom quietly. We learned each other's rhythms, the way Damien's brows furrowed when he was stressed, the small habits that revealed his vulnerability, the subtle cues that told me he was letting his guard down. And he learned mine, The way I needed reassurance, the gestures that made me feel cherished, the words that could anchor me when doubt crept in. We celebrated our victories together, small and large, and comforted each other during setbacks. Damien's office became less of a battlefield and more of a sanctuary, a place where we could exist without pretense. Colleagues began to notice the subtle changes, how he lingered longer during meetings, how his rare smiles often found me, but none could fully decipher the bond we had cultivated, a bond both delicate and unbreakable. One evening, as the first snow of winter began to fall over the city, Damien surprised me with a quiet dinner at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the skyline. The lights below mirrored the stars above, creating a cocoon of intimacy that felt suspended in time. "I wanted to do this," he said softly, taking my hand across the table, "to celebrate. Not just the love, but the courage it took to let it exist." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the candlelight between us. "It's beautiful," I said, "because it's real, because it's ours." Damien's fingers traced patterns over the back of my hand, the motion intimate and grounding. "Real," he repeated as if tasting the word. "I've never felt more alive, more like myself." The months continued, seasons changing, and our love grew with each passing day. We faced challenges, yes, but the foundation we had built, trust, respect, and a willingness to confront vulnerability, allowed us to weather them. Damien's cold exterior became a rare luxury, reserved only for the pressures of work, while his true warmth shone in moments we shared away from prying eyes. I came to understand that love wasn't just passion or desire, it was patience, commitment, and the willingness to remain steadfast in the face of fear. And Damien embodied that lesson, showing me that even the hardest hearts could learn to trust, to surrender, and to embrace the joy that comes from allowing oneself to be truly known. One quiet Sunday morning, we walked through Central Park, the crisp air carrying the scent of winter trees. Damien's hand found mine naturally, fingers intertwining in a gesture so ordinary yet so extraordinary in its significance. We talked about trivial things, the cafe down the street, a book I wanted to read, a film he had been meaning to watch, but the comfort of our closeness made even the mundane feel sacred. At a small clearing, with the city skyline peeking between snow-dusted branches, Damien stopped. He turned to me, his expression soft but filled with the same intensity that had captivated me months ago. "I never want to go back to the way things were," he said quietly. "The distance, the fear, the walls. I want only this. You, here with me, always." I felt tears prick my eyes, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming gratitude and love. "I feel the same," I whispered, pressing my forehead to his. "Always." In that moment, the city around us seemed to fade. The snowflakes, the distant hum of traffic, the faint laughter of passers-by all became a backdrop to the quiet, steadfast love between us. Damien's arms wrapped around me, and I rested my head against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the solidness of his presence, and the unspoken promise that no matter what challenges came, we would face them together. Our journey had been far from easy, woven with tension, fear, and moments of doubt, but it had led us here, to a place of peace, of acceptance, and of profound happiness. The cold manager, the man who once seemed untouchable and distant, had revealed the depth of his heart. And I, who had once feared vulnerability, had discovered the beauty of surrendering to love. As we walked hand in hand through the park, snow falling softly around us, I knew that the abyss we had once feared was no longer a void to fall into, but a vast expanse we could traverse together. With Damien by my side, the future seemed limitless, filled with promise, warmth, and the quiet magic of a love that had been worth every risk, every doubt, and every heart-stopping moment along the way. And in that city, amidst the lights, the snow, and the hum of life, we found our sanctuary not in walls or offices, but in each other. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.